Last June, in the week before Styx, the South Sound Traditional Inuit Kayak Symposium, Dubside and I walked onto an early morning ferry at Anacortes and headed for Friday Harbor in the San Juan Islands. This ferry ride was just one leg of a longer road trip, stopping to see old friends and returning to places that shaped us as paddlers.
The San Juan Islands out here are a great paddling area because you have real currents and tides out here and real conditions. When I say real, I mean you can be on your little lake or river or even some place like Philadelphia, which has got ships and tugs, but out here the current and the weather conditions can really creep up on you, and this is not a place for beginners. And those disaster stories you can read about in the Deep Trouble books, a lot of them take place right out here because somebody saw all this beautiful water and got their $400 recreational kayak and thought it would be a good idea to just put it on the beach here and come out and paddle, and got into big trouble. When I first paddled from Orcas out to, what's the one out there? Is it Susha Island? Or one of the ones way out there far north. We were out there with some other folks, and we're paddling to get there, and we're paddling and we're paddling and we're paddling. And somebody who knew something, who had taken some training from Leon and Shauna, said, we can't keep doing this. Because they could see from looking in relation to where we were, the current was too strong there. We were making no headway. We were just spinning our wheels. It felt like we were going somewhere because the current was moving so much. So we had to cut at a different angle and ferry over a little bit more to get out of that current to actually make it to where we were going to go. If we just kept on heading there, we'd have stayed there for another couple hours till the current completely switched around. So you have to know stuff like that when you're out here. As well as to go to this remote island, you have to really watch the weather, because if the wrong wind kicks up, you can get stuck out there and not be able to get back for a day or more. And it takes some careful planning, so not a place for beginners. So right now we're going to see Skip Pauls, who back in 2008 or 9 or something like that, he wrote a letter to me, which was my main method of communication back then, and still can be used. We put a stamp on an envelope, put it in the mail. And he said he was a paddler in Mendocino, California, and he enjoyed, I guess he'd seen my videos and things, and used the Greenland paddle. And it told me anytime I was in that area, I should look him up. So I was able to do that at some point later. And Mendocino is an amazing area with the geology there. There are all these caves and some even tunnels that you can paddle through if you got to know what time the tide is and pay attention to that. But it's right on the coast. It's the ocean there. And he had it all figured out. And at that time, I don't think it was a big destination sea kayak area because there weren't a whole lot of people in the area doing that. But he had learned all the different passages and cool places to go, and he took us out there. A couple times I visited him there, and we had quite a nice time. And then that tax event that lasted for 5 years, Traditional Arctic Kayak Symposium, which was held on various locations on the California coast. One year they had it there in Mendocino. I think that, Maligak came that time. And so he was, I don't know if you could say hosting the event, but his location was hosting the event. But he eventually moved up here to the San Juans. He had a very busy job within IT, and he had to take care of that. So I would often call him every couple years, and sometimes he would get back to me, and sometimes he was too busy. But it's nice to keep in touch with him. So he has a less hectic job now. And so I'm looking forward. I haven't seen him since quite a couple years before COVID, so it's been a while.
As the ferry threaded its way through the islands, I thought back to my first kayak camping trips here years ago, when I found myself more than once stranded by dense fog, unable to see well enough to commit to a channel crossing before the tide turned, knowing that once it did, the crossing would no longer be possible. It is precisely these challenges of fog and current that make the San Juan Islands one of the most captivating places for sea kayaking. When we landed in Friday Harbor, Skip was waiting for us at the dock. He loaded our gear into his truck and drove us to his house, where we sat down and began to talk about his journey. From cold, demanding crossings along the New England coast to the raw surge channels and honeycombed caves of Mendocino, and spoke about what it truly means to know a piece of shoreline.
So today is June 5th, 2005, and I am sitting on beautiful San Juan Island with a friend from way back, Skip Pauls. How's it going, Skip?
Good. It's great to have you here.
Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside.
Thanks for having me.
So I want you to tell me about all the paddling you've done and all the cool places you've paddled and some of your favorite places to go. And you started out paddling.
I started getting on the water in the late 90s, like the end of the 90s. I decided I was going to get in a boat and go out on my own. And at the time we lived in Boston area. So I jumped
East Coast, all right.
East Coast. So back then I didn't know anything about anything. I grabbed a sit on top and jumped in on a foggy morning, the crack of dawn in Essex, and paddled out into the bay and was hooked. And then once you get a taste of it, I need to ramp up my skills, and so I found some people that could give me proper instruction. And
when did you switch from a sit on top to
almost
something else?
immediately, like
Okay.
as soon as I looked into learned about British boats, and you're not going to learn to roll with a sit on top unless you're Dubside and want to show that it can be done. But so I immediately got with a group that was using British boats, and the group there, that was the Charles River Canoe and Kayak Company, which I still revere because they had some leaders there that their trips were, he kind of would handpick the people he was willing to take out on these more extreme kind of every other week trips, and through them we did some really ramped up the distance over the next few years, doing pretty much every bit of the New England coastline. We'd paddle from Plymouth to Provincetown, which is like a 20-mile crossing, and there the elevations are super low, so you're paddling straight out into open sea for hours before you start to see any indication.
So what do we got here? This is not a drone. This is an actual.
No, it's a little. The airport's about 3 miles away over there, and it's a little puddle hopper. Through them, I paddled literally every inch of certainly Massachusetts, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, all of the Elizabeth Islands down to Cuttyunk and Buzzards Bay, and all of the Cape, every bit of the Cape, outside and inside, and up north, up to North Shore. There's Cape Ann is what they call North Shore area. It's basically an island that has a channel that separates it from the mainland. It's about a 20-mile round trip. You go out of Gloucester and you go out and open Oceanside and come back around the north, and we do a bunch of those kind of circumnav of Cape Ann. And so I was there for like 10 years. We'd go up. New Hampshire has a little tiny bite of the coast, like it's got a river mouth, and Portsmouth, which is like the only interesting coastal part of New Hampshire. And then you get into Maine, and we did a lot of or I either soloed or went with a friend or two at most to do a lot of the Maine Island Sea Trail, which is like a collective of, if you're a member, you can camp on these little tiny nuggets of islands all up and down the Maine coast. And we did all the sounds. There's Sebascodegan, Penobscot, and all the way up to what they call down east. Like you go beyond Bar Harbor, and then it becomes much more exposed. It's no longer like sounds and things like that. You're on open coast.
How long trips were these?
Those are typically this was the mark left on me by the guy at Charles River Canoe and Kayak. Was miles were really not a thing. These were, not a consideration. Like every trip with him was usually like a 15 to 20 mile day, and that was what enabled you to do like a Martha's Vineyard circumnavigation, or down to the bottom of the Elizabeth Islands and back to Woods Hole in one day. And they were long days, and that's kind of that was the mindset that I had for, if I was going to go kayaking, it was going to be a lot of miles and just take whatever situations we had come to.
What kayak were you paddling back then?
Back then, so the first serious boat I bought was a Diamante made by Impex. It was a little bit beamy, but it was really rockered for the day. It was and since we were offshore a lot, it surfed nicely. It just handled really beautifully, and I was comfortable in it for long days, and I could paddle it fast and straight. And it was, I had that boat for probably 12 years. It was on the heavier side, but I could shoulder it and handle it myself. So we do a lot of dune hopping, like you kind of cross from one side to the other, and out toward Great Point and Nantucket. You do a lot of, from the tidal areas out to the ocean side, kind of run back and forth across.
You were doing that year round in winter months?
Yeah, I paddled every month of the year in New England. So we do, Cape Ann had a lot of little coves that in winter you could actually do some ice breaking. I mean, it was kind of silly, but you'd be out in the open. We had gear for that. I mean, I'd gear up for that. I had a dry suit with a like 300 weight fleece, one piece underneath, and heavy mitts. I never liked gloves. I never liked paddling in gloves because I have like circulation issues. So even the smallest or lightest glove would kind of create some restriction on my blood flow. So I really liked big mitts. They do everything you need. But yeah, you could get inside in winter. The inner waters of the little coves and bays would freeze up at the edges, so you kind of poke in there and do a little ice breaking. But it was bitter, like 20-degree days with a good 15-knot wind. That's cold. That's a cold time to be on the water.
Can you recall any incidents or dangerous things, close calls, or any significant?
There's kind of a joke in the Star Trek world where I'm not a super Trekkie, but the joke is like, Captain Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy and Ensign Wojo-Ho, all beamed down to the planet's surface. Which one's not going to be coming back? So there was usually on these long day trips, there was always like the wild card. Like we all kind of knew each other on the long. It wasn't a formal group, but it was usually the same core people that knew what we were getting into. It was a long day. And then there was the guy we hadn't paddled with before. He was usually the source of either like a shortened trip or something going sideways. So that also drove me to a lot of my later years of just being a solo paddler. When we got to Mendocino, I was...
So no call the Coast Guard incidents or?
No, we got yelled at a few times in the fog by Martha's Vineyard ferries because they come and go from Woods Hole, and we were supposed to ferry. This is under the leadership of the trip lead that knew all the islands, and it was kind of early days. This isn't a tragedy or an on the water thing, but we ended up having to paddle back across Vineyard Sound to get back to Woods Hole because we missed the ferry that we were supposed to be on. And there was a fog coming in, and we got in the ferry lanes, and they're pretty grumpy about anyone being in the ferry lanes. So they had I don't remember what group it is but when we landed, they came and chewed out the trip lead about getting in but we had VHF, we carried VHF, we were fully geared, knew what we were doing. Woods Hole was a great place to train in. We did a lot of BCU training in Woods Hole, and the idea there was to take a less experienced group out into the currents there. They're like 4 or 5 knots. The big channel, the cans will just sit over on their side for hours during peak, or for an hour during peak. And but we just take people out there and then create a situation like ferries coming, people have gone over in the current, and do rescues. And that was where I met. In New England was Derek Hutchinson would come occasionally, and a lot of my BCU instruction. For
instruction or to paddle with?
Both. He was at that point. He wouldn't run workshops, but he would show up at like our midwinter rolling sessions at pools and things because he knew, I guess, a lot of the instructors there. Rhode Island was another great place to paddle. Like Block Island is 10 miles offshore, and again, these are low elevation, glacial moraine things. So you'd put in a Port Judith and say, we're paddling to Block Island, and you can't see it. You paddle for hour or two before it comes into view, like a little mound in the distance. And the plan those days was to ferry back, but we get over there, it was a beautiful day, and then the group was good, and so we just paddle back. So those were like 20-mile days, just without any even thinking about it.
What can you tell me about Derek Hutchinson's personality?
He was, I think he's exactly what you would imagine him to be. He's a little gruff, intentionally full of himself. Like, didn't really want to hear about what you had done or hear any of your stories. And he did a lot of the, like one arm, like paddle behind the head kind of
trademark move.
Yeah, all the trademark moves. Yeah. And it was early days back then, so I had just learned to roll. So then the main guy shows up on the scene, and you're kind of enamored and try to engage him in conversation. And he's not a big conversationalist, but he would show up at these things just to kind of be there and throw some pointers out to people or criticize what they thought they were doing right. And he was a funny guy, very British.
Right.
I spent a lot of time in England for work, and so I know that I got to see a lot of Brits, and he was a good one.
All right.
So those are early days.
So how do we get to Mendocino?
Yeah,
or the West Coast.
I did it in a couple of steps. We went. My wife at the time was from the West Coast, and she'd always wanted to move back there. We got dislodged from New England after 10 years. I went through Houston for a company move. Houston's not worth mentioning, other than that if you're a kayaker, it's this kind of difficult place to pursue.
I hear the water's really muddy.
The water's really brown and hot. There's no cool time of year to paddle, really. I did try to find some people to get on water with. You can go down into Galveston Bay, but my two or three attempts.
From the reference point of where you started paddling, I guess Houston's not a very
It was hot,
cool place.
And I was being eaten by mosquitoes while trying to do a rolling session, and just like it was rough.
Right.
So I had a brief hiatus from kayaking, and I thought, okay, I'm going to take up sailing. People sail here. Went through all the ACA training and did offshore navigation and went in some big keel boats and did stuff for a while.
ACA training for sailing?
ASA, sorry.
ASA,
sorry.
Different. Okay.
ASA.
Right.
I was there for like a year and did sailing and things, but then I couldn't take Houston, so we moved to the San Juans. And that was my first,
Nice
this is back in 2003.
Right.
And we were on orcas. And so I paddled the San Juans for like 2-3 years. We weren't there very long, but coming from something that's oceanside to a sound, it was all about the currents and wind and storms and things like that. So you would go out in storms to get a little bit of action and learned currents, but the scenery was just eye-popping. So I really enjoyed that first round in the San Juans. For family reasons, we ended up moving to Northern California from here, and from Orcas, we went to Mendocino. It was one of the, I needed to convince someone to go with me, and I needed to convince them that it had to be a place that was as scenic or more scenic than Orcas. So I took it to Mendocino.
For my international listeners, so the San Juan Islands are the northwest corner of the state of Washington, northwest corner of the continental United States. And in the San Juan Islands, we mentioned Orcas Island, San Juan Island, there's some other islands.
Yep.
And so now you're going down to California, which is several hundred miles to the south along the coast of the U.S.
Right. About 600 or 700 miles south of the San Juans is Northern California is a very, it's coastal Pacific coast on steroids. It's bigger and more, that there's no, the difference between West Coast and East Coast, having paddled both, the East Coast has a continental shelf about 100 miles out that will take a lot of the energy out of the big ocean swell. So by the time whatever you see on the ocean side in the East Coast and New England is had some of the energy knocked out of it. California and the West Coast doesn't have a continental shelf. So the stuff that's been building all the way across the Pacific or out of the Bay of Alaska and things come straight down and hammers into the cliffs. So it's always big, and there's always a swell. And I didn't know about this. I hadn't paddled that kind of beefy, raw ocean up against cliffs, nowhere to hide kind of thing before. But I don't think I appreciated the difference yet when I first arrived there. I didn't jump right in the water when we got to Mendocino. I didn't know anybody there. I just kind of couch scouted where I was going to try to get in the water. The coast features a lot of, it's cliffs with inland rivers that kind of creeks that flow out into the ocean, and they call them dog holes because they're a break in the cliffs that's from a big logging, or in the 19th century logging ship perspective. They were big enough to kind of go in, turn around, and go back out. There's not much of a bay there, but there were little tiny embayments that had a river flowing out into them. And that was usually where you could access the ocean. It was to put into one of the rivers just inside these dog holes or little tiny bays. A lot of them are state parks in California, so you're lucky you have permission to do that. You just pull in a parking lot. My first outing, I scouted it. It was just a 6-mile run down the coast. And I had my wife drop me off and was going to pick me up at one of the other river mouths. At this point I was a 12 or 15 year paddler, and I'd done everything I could do in the San Juan. So I went down there and I put in one of these dog holes, and it was like I hadn't really learned, I had no intuition or feel for swell reports yet, like what sea state would be like on a 6-foot day. Usually, other than October, 4 to 6 foot day was just every day. That was a small day in Mendocino, was a 4 to 6 foot sea. My first outing I put in Caspar, at Caspar Beach, near the town of Caspar, and it's like a mile paddle out to the mouth where you get to the real open swell. And I got out that far and realized this is much bigger than anything I've ever paddled before. And I'm out there alone. I don't know the coast. I don't know the shoreline or yet how to read surge zones and things like that at this scale of swell. But I just head down, turned left, and headed south. But suddenly you're surrounded, even on a 6-foot day in a good boat, it's like you're surrounded by houses. You're just the swell.
Waves the size
you lose
of houses.
no line of sight. And I didn't know where I was, but I had my VHF and dry suit. I was geared up properly. I just head down and started paddling, and that was my first taste of the sea state there, how much bigger it was than anywhere else I would ever paddle. I paddled out of Southern California, and everywhere else, nothing really compares to like the Oregon and Northern California in terms of scale. But I made it down to Big River, and Big River just seemed like a river flowing out into the bay, but I did not realize that it was also a really big surf spot. Fully comfortable surf landings and things, but these were 12-foot, 15-foot waves that had built during my time on the water. The hour or two I'd been on the water, I got down there, and that was this huge swell smashing into Big River, so I had to do a surf landing in a beach I didn't know anything about. Plus the amount of current coming out of Big River is big enough that as you get close to shore, you'll stall out trying to land on the beach, because if you get pushed back, now you're sitting right in the break zone. And this is all just like, okay, seat of my pants, learn what to do and what not to do and when to do it there. And but long story short, Mendocino is an incredibly three-dimensional place to paddle. It's caves, it's tunnels, it's arches for 20 miles. Like that whole stretch of coast is some of the most interesting shoreline you'll ever experience, because it is three-dimensional. Both the swells changing the height of an arch by half the time you paddle through it.
I've been to a few, what they say, we're going to go to a sea cave, and you can get inside. Mendocino, it's like honeycomb.
It's honeycombed,
yeah.
And there's no map of that stuff. Literally, there's no guide to that coast. So I would go out 3 times a week. We lived right by the water, and I had a job. I was working from home. I could just pick my days. Like afternoon, I'll just go drop in, and I just made it a point. I had some bread and butter paddles that I eventually got used to. I knew what I would do from Russian Gulch around Mendocino headlands, work your way into the headlands, and there's just a lot of surge zone, a lot of caves that are safe or not safe to go into under all kinds of different conditions. And but the constant for like three years was I paddled alone. So I was experiencing all this, setting my own lines that I wouldn't cross, like what I was willing to do by myself and not do. But I did kind of map out everything from north of Fort Bragg down to south of Elk, almost to Anchor Bay, and there's a group of rocks there, Anchor Bay rocks. But I paddled every inch of those coastlines for years, and knew all the caves and fun places to paddle.
So I would say then that as Warren Williams is to Deception Pass, Skip Paul's is to Mendocino coastline there.
I guess for better
at least
words.
at that
It was,
time. Yeah.
The fun part came when I built, it was just something I needed to do to satisfy my own initiatives. But at some point, I encountered an individual that would paddle with me. He didn't have the history that I had. So
before that, all these solo paddles, you go out there and there was nobody else out there in a kayak.
Never. And no boat. It's not
No
not
other
really a
watercraft
marine
out there.
recreational area, because it's just, you'll have fishermen, but they go farther out offshore, and it's not a fun place to go and fish because the swell is so big. If you're out there as a recreational fisherman, you're more than likely to get seasick. No, it was not a big business of doing fishing touring unless they went way offshore. But I rarely would see any boats on the water of any kind. This is an interesting feature that most people don't think about, but Mendocino could be foggy. It was either very gloomy and dark and kind of dismal when you'd go out, which added to the sort of anxiety of going out in unknown waters and big swell. But it could also be blindingly sunny. And although I loved it, one of the most challenging times of day would be to go out in late afternoon at the early part of sunset, or early sunset, late afternoon, which was when a lot of my opportunities to get on the water were. But the West Coast sunset is just blinding, and you look west, and it's all just reflected.
As you're going out,
you're just going into the sun, and it would conceal like break and other things when you're trying to look west, and you can't see, even with good polarized sunglasses, which I early on I decided that sunglasses were a curse, an anathema of, if you were going out in big seas, that they could be a problem for seasickness. So I kind of eschewed sunglasses and brimmed hats for a lot of I wore bandanas like you do to keep the sun off the top of my head, but I didn't like things in my field of view that in heaving seas.
Like a low sunset like that, a brim, it's reflecting off the water as well as coming straight at you, so it's just there's all this glare.
I didn't mention, but obviously in as soon as you go to Mendocino, you were in helmet country. This was like San Juan's.
Oh yeah, with the rocks.
San Juan's, you don't need a helmet. You look a little silly because it's currents and things. Maybe Deception Pass if you're going to get crazy, but Mendocino was helmets always, and so a little bit of a brim on the helmet was the first thing I sort of allowed to use, because you could kind of tip your head. But yeah, the sunshine was kind of crazy, and it made it challenging to paddle out into the afternoon in the blinding sunshine, just because it would conceal what's going on with the water and early warning of stuff. But when you're out, I just never would see anybody else paddling in all those years. The exception was in Mendocino, the Bay Area Sea Kayakers are a big group, and they have an annual trip with a big crowd that would show up in October when the seas go dead calm. So it's a very popular time there with people that from the Bay Area that knew a lot of the easily accessible caves and tunnels, things. That's the time to come and bring people that haven't been before, because it's like paddling a lake, and you can just go and easily get in and out of these features without being surprised by swell.
What's the tide range there?
It's not big. It's like a 6-7 foot tide range usually. Tides, coastal currents were a little bit of a thing, but really, they were such a second or third order effect compared to any of the swell and surge zone effects. Like just the pull and tug of break and stuff in surge zones was far exceeded anything that was happening with tidal movements. And
Okay.
things. You'd hit some funny spots here.
But there'd be times when the general water would be too high to go into a certain cave area.
Oh yes, yeah. There could
you
be.
had to know
some.
when you could go into some places,
Yeah,
when you
it
couldn't.
would change your headroom, and even if there was a little bit of swell, it's like that's just going to be a little too tight if a 1 foot higher wave comes through. But a lot of time, most of them are very comfortable and a lot of clearance. There were ones that literally the approach, you'd come in from within a surge zone, kind of a protected area, and there was like a slit in the cliffs that was so narrow you could get your boat in, but you couldn't paddle. You had to put your paddle on your deck and kind of push your way along the walls, and then it would open up into this a big open ceilinged like a blowhole kind of thing that were back in the cliffs. But to get in and out of there, you did have to. It was a little claustrophobic now and then. There were a lot in the Mendocino headlands.
So in learning all the different areas there and all the different little cave passages and things, did you ever get really bashed in the head or a big injury?
Nothing in the head. If it had happened at that time, it would have probably been an issue for my neck. But there were a few times on big days where some of the surge zones you'd come to assume were kind of safe areas that no matter what was going on the outside of some really large rocks, like the height of those trees, you were in a passage that under 99% of conditions, you'd be fine. And a couple of times when I was with Jeff, one of the guys that, very serious paddler and a very skilled instructor that showed up later years in Mendocino, and I was coming to that part of the story, but I was with him and one other person, and in this narrow passage, it was not a cave, it didn't have a ceiling, but there were a lot of caves this way, and we got completely surprised by probably a rogue wave on a big day, but it completely came up over this huge rock and dumped an enormous amount of water into that channel and just sent us in all directions, and extremely aerated water. The energy was going to push you right into those caves, and thankfully that's when all the hours and hours of sitting and rolling and just making it like muscle memory is, and in those conditions it wasn't even a clean roll because the water is so aerated and pulling and pushing that it was a skull roll that saves you. It's like that's what I tell people that what I would take out is that learn the skull roll, because
the vertical sculling roll is the one. One of those.
Just anything with that you can keep a constant upward rolling movement going when a single sweep might not get purchase, and if you can scull your way up in turbulent water, that will probably save you someday. So I just remember paddling out of that situation. Jeff was waiting at the edge of the channel where we were in better protection, and I just felt like lead. Like after I'd rolled all the adrenaline and everything else and paddled maybe 500 feet, maybe 300 yards to get out of that and met up with him, just felt like lead. Arms and everything else were totally dead. And I would just remember him looking at me and going, "Thank you for not having me have to rescue you in that situation." Thanks for being skilled enough for me not to have to rescue you. But it was, we didn't have...
Did you get any major boat damage sometimes? Like
a few times, yeah. That was, I was relating this story earlier. I think it was a little bit, we were paddling in a group that was visiting. This is in almost the last year I was in Mendocino. And I had started looking around at some boats by Sterling's kayaks. And I'd had this Diamante that was my workhorse forever, and I'd paddled for a decade and a half. And literally the week that I saw some of his work and paddled a couple of them and started thinking about upgrading my boat to something from his line, was almost the same day that I crunched my boat, and I just mistimed a surge spot and ended up on top of the rocks, and then sliding off the rocks and catching the bow and going back down into the hole, and then getting put back up on the rocks, and it punched holes in my bow and broke the nose of the kayak. Did a lot of damage to the glass underneath me that was kind of hidden damage. It didn't rupture the hull, but it had broken all of the glass that was fiberglass in there. So that was kind of the end of that boat's life. I repaired it, but it always looked a little Frankenstein-y. It's where you do your on-water repairs with duct tape and a few essentials to get you out of that.
Wouldn't you consider like a plastic kayak better suited for those conditions?
Yeah, there's always that. There's that legitimate school of thought. There are a lot of boats that are just made for, if I'm going to do a lot of trashy work on rocks and in surge zones, why not just go ahead and paddle a plastic boat? And but all my trips, I didn't do a lot of sit and play, which I knew guys that were really about, let's get on the water, get to some cool spot and just stay there all day working a surge zone or around a rock and surf the spot. And we call it park and play kind of. Yeah. And they were more like a little more whitewater mentality, and they didn't like the long dredge of a miles day. But when I would go out, I wanted my light boat that I could paddle fast and cover miles and still get in those spots. But you're going to break one once in a while.
And all this in Mendocino is on the coastline there. There's no, to paddle miles offshore, there's no real reason to do that or place to go or anything.
No, just covering point to point. It's a long stretch of coast, and there's a bunch of a sequence of these river mouths. There's the Noyo in Fort Bragg. The 10-mile river is at the top. Then the Noyo in Fort Bragg, Rabbit Cove, Jug Handle, Caspar, Russian Gulch, Jack Peters Gulch, which is just north of the Mendocino headlands. Then Big River. Then there are some lesser ones along the way. Then Albion, which is an enormous, the head at Albion is enormous. Then Navarro, the heights start going up the Navarro River, and then you're starting to get down to Elk. If people are listening and haven't ever gone beyond Mendocino, go down to Elk. Elk is a phenomenal place. It's even more three-dimensional than Mendocino. There's just less of it, but if it also is lined with caves and tunnels. You approach it from the north, you can go through like a quarter-mile long tunnel that gets you from kind of outside to inside Elk Bay. But I just wanted to cover I wanted to experience every bit of that coastline, so I broke it up into these 10 or 15 mile
You just recited that off the top of your head with no notes, so I can see you intimately know that whole coastline.
And there's a lot of little stuff in between. The lesser, they don't even have a name, but there's a lot of cool stuff.
When I was there were some other people there on the shoreline. They weren't fishermen, they weren't boaters, they were diving for abalone?
The abalone divers, yes. Abalone divers, as we insensitively called them. There was usually casualties every year, guys.
And so it's the shell that it's on the bottom somewhere.
They used to be massive, and you could just, back in the early 20th century, you could just walk along at low tide and pry them off any rock, and they were huge. They have a big shell, but they're like they're more like a clam or but they're one-sided. It's not a bivalve, or they don't have but they have a shell on one side, and they just kind of a foot that clamps onto rocks. But as time passed, they became harder and harder to find. So people would.
Is that from humans?
Yeah, just consuming them, so then it became the trick you had to dive to go down in these coves that are full of kelp. So they would be low down at deep levels in the kelp forests, and people would dive down. There's a tool you could use to kind of pry them off, put them in your bag, and you're only supposed to take so many.
So in order not to wipe them out so much, the restriction is you cannot scuba dive to get them. You must free dive, hold your breath and go down.
And you can only take so many, and there's only ones beyond a certain size. I never did it. I partook of someone else's work a few times, but if it's not cooked absolutely perfectly, it's just rubbery, and it's like, I don't know, what's the point? But the ones that die naturally would leave beautiful shells. They're like a mother of pearl inside the shell, and some of them were as big as a dinner plate if you knew where to look, and were kind of beaches that people weren't walking all the time.
So the main reason to get them is not to eat the meat, but for the shells.
I think both. I mean, if you're going to dive for them, you're probably going to eat them, and then look for the ones that I have this 12-inch abalone shell.
And so that's what ultimately ends up, say, like on guitars and fine inlay work.
Yes. Yeah. And I have some sculptures stuff that I would kind of inlay with the bits. You could find the stuff would get pulverized in the surf. So a typical beach a rocky beach in Mendocino, if you scoop up a pile of the black rocky sand, it was interspersed with little bits of the abalone. You kind of filter through that. But yeah, you could also find the big shells. We had stacks of them all around the house. That it was nifty to use them like a soap dish in your Mendocino household, but some of them were just huge.
And so the people who are trying to get these things, the casualties occur when they're free diving and they push their limits too hard?
Yeah, they just get trapped in the kelp and panic and get a lungful of water, and that's it. And but there were usually a few every year.
Really?
These big time in the season when it was allowed. But the ecosystem has changed since I left there. It went through a couple of waves. Like the kelp forest really died back because the urchins died back, and then that was what the abalone were eating. I believe at this point the abalone are just not even a feature of the Mendocino coast any longer.
Oh, yeah.
Because all the businesses that catered to abalone divers and during the season have all gone away because there were no abalone and people stopped coming. The kelp was a big thing that also, if you haven't paddled big primeval coastline before, it was a big deal, the bull kelp. So this is bull kelp. They're forests with heads that were generally the size of a softball, but could be 6 or 7 inches across on the really big.
So it's anchored to the bottom way down deep, and it just spreads up to the surface.
Yes, and then so it would form, and they loved the surge zones, and these inner bays. They would they were mostly an inshore kind of thing. You'd see them out further out, but as the depth drops off, they're not anchored to anything. So, but it was a constant feature in the early years, and it was very stable. The amount of kelp, but there were specialized things you learned to do because a lot of your surfing into a surge zone, coming in from open water with a wave, and you're targeting to get inside behind these ledges and rocks. There's like only 1 or 2 ways in. You could often end up surfing in and landing in these kelp beds. And
so now instead of a surface water, you have all this seaweed leaf fronds all around your kayak, really thick.
And the bigger, people don't think of it as these leafy fronds. Think of it as big, giant, rubbery pipes that are lying with very little space between them. Okay. So you end up on this like surface of rubbery pipe.
And not just coming up to the surface, but laying flat on the surface.
They lay down in big, giant groups, like dozens and dozens of them in clusters. So you literally may end up having to drag yourself across to get into a little bit deeper water off this bed of kelp. But if you got surprised, it was just one of the fun early things to say, look, here's the skill you need to know. You might go over in a kelp bed and you don't have clear water to set up for a roll or get your paddle where you want it to be. Is the kelp roll you can demonstrate it. I never in the heat of the moment, I never had to do a kelp roll in a real situation, but you kind of go over and then make sure your paddle's going up vertically and just let it fall over on top of the kelp. Then you've got all the purchase in the world. You can almost just like a poolside roll. Okay. But you just don't want to panic by trying to go through the motions of a normal roll setup and getting your paddle hooked up in the tangle of stuff and then panicking. It's just I can, if I needed to, I could actually probably just roll up on the kelp. Yeah. It's that thick. And the funny thing was that over the years we were there, toward the end, things became really dynamic. I think as climate change kicked in, things were happening fast. And we had this one year where the kelp literally doubled in quantity. So everywhere you went, it was really kind of not a fun year to paddle because every access point was just choked with kelp. There was nowhere to go to escape the kelp paddling except to just stay offshore, and it really blocked a lot of the areas you would go in to kind of take your choice of cave entrance or a little back channel to go through was just clogged with kelp. There was nowhere to go that you weren't just paddling in kelp. And but then I think that was the year before I left. It kind of cleared up the next year, but then things went in the opposite direction. The kelp beds really died off. That caused a lot of urchin stuff, and then that's cascaded to the abalone. And but I think it's come back somewhat, but it was interesting and gratifying to be there long enough to see that these kinds of big dynamics can happen, and it really changes the experience of going there and paddling. I've been blessed with more than one close encounter with whales that were spontaneous, and I didn't try to find them, but one was out here off Nia Bay. There was a really close encounter with a pond. I was alone and just sat among the grays that had tucked in, or the humpback, sorry, that had tucked in for a little breather coming in out of the open ocean. But one of them was paddling from Big River down to Van Dam. It was a stormy day. It was raining, and the wind was out of the north, and I was just, I had paddled north. I parked at Van Dam, paddled north like 3-4 miles up to Big River Bay, and turned and came back and was just surfing with the wind. And it was like 6-foot seas, and I would just surf a wave and go down in the trough and wait for the next wave. And it was, the winds had picked up, and it was just stormy, and I entered a trough, and just as I came down the wave, there was a gray whale fluking, like as close as you are to me, just going the other direction. All I saw was the arch of its back and the flukes coming. It was just going the other way. I'm sure she or he knew that I was there, but that moment you freeze in time. You're out there all alone, and here's this big fluke passing the other way, and I caught the next wave, and I tasted adrenaline for the next 3 miles, getting back, finding my way back to Van Dam. It's one of my favorite stories, because it was just a miracle moment that you're that close to something like that, and didn't plan on it. And no one else was there to enjoy the moment or talk about it, but it's pretty cool.
Has anyone made a guidebook for the Mendocino coast there?
Like I said, I mentioned, I think the answer is no. No one's ever really, there might be charts and things, but Jeff Locksher built a business there. He came a year or two before I moved away, and he's extremely skilled. He used to do training with the Navy SEALs. He was kind of their instructor for doing sea landings and insertions by sea in kayaks and things. So he would take them out to do training of troubles at sea, like create situations they had to work through. And he was a well-ranked competitive kayak surfer and whitewater, surf kayaks. And he moved up there, I think, he was from SoCal, San Diego. He moved to Mendocino to set up kind of a guide business, both open ocean and some of the rivers offer a lot of nice calm paddling for people that visit. But he made a very successful business with his wife there for years. And but it was really gratifying. He was the first person that, like one-on-one, I took him and showed him everything that I had learned over the years, showed him all the cool stuff. And I appreciated that he appreciated it. He was, and he taught me a lot of stuff, even at that stage. I think you met him, we paddled at Tax that one time, but he was just a great trip leader for taking people out in insane conditions, like 30-foot seas that we did, and just really huge days. And he'd talk people through that were kind of decided they weren't confident enough to do this, but made them confident to head out into that stuff. There's some cool YouTube videos of Russian Gulch at about a 30-foot peak at the mouth. It was like I think it was like a 16 or 17-foot day, but it was peaking at about 30 feet, at the mouth of Russian Gulch, where you're trying to get out. And there's some good footage of us paddling out into those seas. And probably the only map is in his mind and my mind. Someone needs to make a book or at least photo document some of this. I had charts because I had like really early GPS stuff that I could trace. I took, and it was super old technology that it would record my track. I couldn't look at a screen and make it at all useful. So all it would do is record my track. I could download the trace later into Google Earth and then plot my trip on a Google Earth. So I would print a lot of those out. So you could see places where the GPS would show you like drilling into a cliff and then coming out on the other side and things. So that would mark a lot of where the caves were and tunnels. And paddling and stuff like Mendocino, you can't come and go at it. I think that's my concluding remark, is that
Okay.
for me, it wasn't a space that you could just kind of come and go or really appreciate if you just showed up one day and wanted to get out on the water with someone that kind of knew that it was a headspace that you kind of developed and then maintain, like the confidence to go out without thinking about it day in and day out. You develop that, and then, but I felt it like I was away when we moved back up here, and it was harder to get to the Olympic coast, fewer access points and a longer drive for me, and I'd go back out on the ocean, but I was out of that headspace now. I wasn't. It wasn't. There was that apprehension now, like I don't know this water, and I know what it can do, and so once you have to be in it like constantly to make it comfortable, and it's always exciting, but there's just a little more adrenaline factor.
All right. Well, you can tell us all about San Juan in maybe part 2 sometime.
Yeah.
But for now,
it's beautiful here.
That'll
Come
cover,
paddle.
the Mendocino with skip poles.
Super fun.
Thank you for being on the Dubcast.
No,
with
thanks for
Dubside.
having me. It was great to see you. I didn't know it would be a feature here, but I really enjoy those years, and I'm glad we got to. I took Dubside. We went out and did some two-man paddles, and I got to show Dubside some of the really cool arches. And I remember that day. It was like a 6 or 8 foot day, and we were.
It was.
I was confident you could roll, so
I could do that.
so we just drill into some of the big surge zones and the big arches, and had fun with it. It was really cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
After our conversation ended, Skip took us to his favorite place on the island. South Beach stretches long and open, its shoreline scattered with bleached driftwood logs. The shore broke into small coves between rocky points. The beach faced south, open to the strait, with the Olympics far off and pale with snow. We longed to stay, but Styx awaited us the next morning. So we said our goodbyes and turned back toward Friday Harbor to catch the ferry to the mainland, leaving the island behind, but not its impression. Until next time, thank you for listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.